Tim Loughton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I first declare my entry in the Register of Members' interest and apologise for missing the opening couple of minutes of the Honourable Lady's speech, such was the having been brought forward on this debate. Can I say I'm delighted that we're having this debate and to be part of it for two main reasons, and they're reasons which I'm sure you will share, Madam Deputy Speaker, because I know your interest here. Firstly, because this is a really important subject, and it's a subject we are failing on, and it's a subject it's really right and proper and beneficial that this House, this Chamber, honourable members are talking about openly, just as we've heard from the Honourable Member for High Peak, that young people are prepared much more now than they ever were before to come forward with their own stories of their own problems and issues, and hopefully find solutions through them. But secondly, I'm delighted to be part of this debate because it's part of the United Kingdom Youth Parliament's work. And it's really significant that we are giving up mainstream parliamentary time in the main chamber of the House of Commons to discuss a report by the Youth Select Committee and offshoot of the UK Youth Parliament. It's a shame we have to do it in backbench business time rather than in government time, and I pay tribute to the Honourable Lady from Dulwich and West Norwood for securing this debate and giving it an excellent start, and this is going to be a high-quality debate, I can see. But I think you share the view, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the Youth Select Committee has taken on such a status and stature now, producing reports of such high quality and well-researched, that not only should the government produce a formal response to them, which it has, but that the government should give up government time in this chamber on an annual basis, just once a year, formally to debate the work of the Youth Select Committee. And that's an idea that I put forward for some time, and I hope that the whips and government managers are listening. Because I'm a big supporter of the United Kingdom Youth Parliament. It was founded in my time in this Parliament. The annual parliamentary sittings, where I always try to attend, are always a great spectacle to come to, and it's always exceedingly frustrating for honorary members, as you know, Madam Deputy Speaker, when we return on the Monday and the Speaker will inevitably say, why don't you lot behave as well as the UK Youth Parliament members who were here on Friday, very smart, very concise, very well behaved, and don't heckle, who set an example. And it's a shame that the media coverage of that isn't rather greater than it is. It's a great event, it's a great organisation, and it's great that we are discussing their work here today. And when I was the Minister for Children and Young People, and we produced the Positive for Youth document, it was all about promoting that sort of youth engagement. And one of the things I most treasure having done is to help the transition for the UK Youth Parliament across to the British Youth Council to secure its future, and I pay tribute to all the work that's happened over the last few years. So they are a mainstream part of the youth voice in this country and in this chamber. I was the first witness ever to be called in front of the Youth Select Committee. It was an awesome and intimidating experience. I was called for their first report back in 2012, along with the then Transport Minister, Norman Baker. We rather too nonchalantly rocked up in front of this group of young people in the Boothroyd room. They were exceedingly well rehearsed. They were exceedingly well researched. They were certainly not taking any BS from anybody. And I have to say, I appeared in front of select committees, mostly the Education Select Committee, on many occasions. That was the most intimidating experience I ever had as a minister in front of a select committee. And it was fantastic. And that's why the work of this select committee and this, their fourth report, absolutely needs to be taken seriously. Frankly, this report is difficult to distinguish, other than the cover, from a House of Commons Select Committee report that many of us are involved on. And I want to congratulate Rhys Hart and his team for the work that they did on it. They did all the things they should have done. They had visits to speak to experts and also sufferers, people going through the experience of mental illness. They took expert witnesses, and they had no fewer than 148 submissions. if only all the other select committees had as many well-informed and well-researched submissions as they did. And also, they have a very substantial democratic endorsement. In 2014, when they were deciding for the subject of the Youth Select Committee report in the Make Your Mark ballot, and that includes a debate in this House and their annual sitting as to what their priorities are going to be, no fewer than 875,000 young people from up and down the country actually bothered to turn out and vote. And of them, more than 90,000 voted specifically for the subject of mental health services, which is why we are here today to debate this report, and it was debated in this chamber. That is a huge democratic mandate. I hold once a year an event in the House of Commons to present democracy awards for schools in West Sussex, including my own constituency, who have achieved high thresholds of turnout in those elections they hold every February. And each year the turnout gets higher and higher. More and more trophies have to be given out. A bigger and bigger room has to be booked to accommodate them all. And last year, one school got a 100% turnout of all their pupils turning out to vote for their UKYP members, which is absolutely fantastic. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is a chunky piece of evidence that needs to be appreciated, looked at, and importantly, acted on. So I'm really delighted that we are giving time to it today. And I'm pleased also that the government did produce, whatever we may think about the shortcomings of what they actually said, produced a formal response to it, jointly by the ministers then at the Department of Health, my right honourable friend, the member for North East Bedfordshire, and the member for East Surrey, representing the Education Department. The trouble is, neither of those ministers are currently in that place now. And I very much welcome my honourable friend from Oxfordshire in her new position, and I'm sure she has and will pick up the ropes of the importance of this very quickly. But we do need consistency in approach to dealing with mental health in this problem, and we need a much better joined-up approach, not just between education and health, but there are very many other aspects of it as well. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, this subject is very important to young people. This report is very important to young people, and it should therefore be very important to this House and to the work of the government. And, as I say, I think many useful lessons must be learnt from it. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm also very frustrated, and I speak as somebody who's been in this House almost 20 years now. I've been a shadow minister for mental health. I was a shadow minister for children and young people for some 9 years. I was the Minister for Children and Young People. I currently chair the all-party group for children, and also the all-party group for 1001 Critical Days, which is all about perinatal mental health. I have seen mental health bills and been part of them come and go. I saw the 2011 mental health strategy, No Health Without Mental Health, a very important statement about the parity of esteem that we need to achieve and still haven't. I saw the 2014 Closing the Gap, Priorities for Essential Change in Mental Health, with specific commitments to improve the mental health care for children and young people. I saw the rolling out of talking therapies, the IAPS programme. In March 2015, as already been mentioned, we had the Mental Health Task Force, which produced Future in Mind. I've seen lots of good work by the former minister, the member for North East Bedfordshire, in the Health Department in particular. And in February of this year, the Mental Health Task Force produced a 5-year forward view for mental health, and lots of talk about the importance of mental health, lots of talk about the importance and necessity to achieve parity of esteem. And as the Honourable Lady for West Ham quite rightly put it, there is still a very big disparity rather than the parity that we must achieve. And here we are again. We are still here, and record numbers of children and young people are still here with mental health problems. So, I certainly will.
The Honourable gentleman agree with me, though. The real problem is we can have reports, we can have task forces, we can have recommendations, but the real issue is this, is that mental health is seen as a health department issue, whereas what we actually need is complete government approach to this, so that mental health and mental well-being is a part for every single piece of policy development?
Is right, and he's preempting a couple of comments I want to make, and certainly my experience and his experience, I'm sure, as ministers, as former ministers, is the complete illusion that there's the phrase joined-up government. And joined-up government doesn't happen in practice. When you become a minister, you are cocooned in a department, and the dialogue that one is used to have with one's colleagues in the division lobby or whatever, when they become ministers in other departments, this huge sort of wall comes between you, and trying to get interdepartmental action becomes really frustrating. I remember in my time I set up something called the Youth Action Group, which consisted of 9 or 10 ministers from 9 or 10 different departments and 6 major children's charities co-chaired by the Prince's Trust and Barnardo's. And they came to us with problems affecting young people, often complex problems. And I take one example. One was to do with housing benefit and accommodation for children in care. And I can't remember what the specific problem was, but it involved housing, which was the remit of the Department of Communities and Local Government. It involved benefits, which was the remit of the Department of Work and Pensions, and it involved children in care, which was the remit of the Department for Education. And so there was this vicious circle of being pushed around from pillar to post. So what that committee was due to do, and alas it hasn't met, I gather, for some 15 months or so, what we did is we had ministers, and invariably there will be at least 6 actual ministers, not just civil servants, from those departments, with their officials, and we would get the relevant ministers from the relevant departments together to go away and solve that problem. And mental illness exactly falls into that category, where it is not just the remit of health or education, because there are so many other implications and knock-on effects that may be the cause, the underlying causes of somebody's mental illness problems as well. So he's absolutely right that the structure of government needs to be so much better, and that's why we need task forces that genuinely cut across government departments. But they can only flourish, in my experience, if they have absolutely the buy-in and the direct engagement of ministers at the top as well. And I think one welcome initiative in the Honourable Gentleman's own party was the appointment of a cabinet-level Minister for Mental Health. I think has slightly gone by the wayside, but the principle was absolutely right, to try and join up those departments at the top table, which is so absolutely important. And of course I will.
Just if I could remind him, I am the Shadow Cabinet Minister for Mental Health, so it hasn't gone away for this side of the House.
Well, I'm delighted. I didn't mean in any way to underestimate the contribution of the Honourable Lady, but I think when it was the Honourable Member for Liverpool Wavertree, thank you very much, she sat at the Cabinet table in this, and I hope that's still the case, which is great, and I very much would like to see my own party in government replicate that, because it's such an important and cross-cutting issue. But despite all of that, as has been described, mental health remains the Cinderella service of the National Health Service, and as the report itself describes it, CAMS and the mental health of children and young people remains the Cinderella service of the Cinderella service. And this whole issue about parity of esteem and funding is so important, because for all those years where mental health was a static or worse still declining portion of the overall National Health Service budget, and we can have arguments about how much the NHS budget has gone up or kept up with inflation and everything else, but all the time that the share of funding in mental health declines, that is a very clear message that it is a secondary priority within the National Health Service, and that therein lies part of the problem. And we should treat it, and we are making progress, I don't want to be too negative, as they do in other countries. If you go into a hospital in Copenhagen in Denmark, for example, you go in the main entrance, and if you've got a problem with diabetes, you turn left. If you've got a problem with mental illness, you turn right. And who cares whether you turn right or left? There's no stigma attached to it. They're treated on exactly the same basis, and that's how we need to treat it here. And there have been many good words, many good intentions, great intentions, best of intentions by many ministers, but in practice, at the sharp end, on the ground, where our young people, our young constituents experience and try to access the mental health support they desperately need, it is not happening, and it's certainly not happening in a uniform way across the whole country. So as a result, Madam new Deputy Speaker, 1 in 4 people in this country at least are still suffering from a mental health problem. And I have a particular interest in perinatal mental health, and I declare the interest that I chaired the all-party group for critical 1001 days, and I chairman of the trustees of the charity, the Parent and Infant Partnership, where we now have 7 PIPs across the country providing direct support and specialist perinatal psychological help to mums, dads with newborn babies. Yet about half of all cases of perinatal depression and anxiety go undetected, and many of those which are then detected fail to receive evidence-based forms of treatment. And really alarmingly, certainly at the time of the report that the all-party group produced in February of last year called Building Great Britons, just 3% of clinical commissioning groups in England have a strategy for commissioning perinatal mental health services. And the upshot of all that, as the Maternal Mental Health Alliance has calculated, is a cost to the NHS, a cost which the NHS can dearly cannot afford, is £8.1 billion for each one-year cohort of births in the United Kingdom, equivalent to almost £10,000 for every single birth in this country. And why is this relevant to young people? Well, nearly 3/4 of this cost relates to the adverse impacts on the child rather than the mother. And followers of attachment, and the Honourable Lady for West Ham mentioned this again, will understand and appreciate the strong links between achieving a strong attachment between a child and a primary carer and good nurturing from the earliest age, and as we put it in our report, from conception to age 2, when the synapses in the brain are developing at a rate of some 40,000 a second, and that child's brain character development is absolutely being formed. Because the earliest experiences shape a baby's brain development literally and have a lifelong impact on that baby's mental and emotional health. And the research shows a direct link between what happens to a mum during the perinatal period and a child in later life. If you have a teenager, age 15 or 16, suffering from some form of depression, there is something like a 90% chance that his or her mum suffered from perinatal depression. The link is that clear. So it is absolutely a false economy not to be helping out with mum at that early age, and dad, who plays a very crucial role in all of this as well. So getting it right with parents and children early is crucial to the good mental health of so many children and young people. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is not rocket science. Technically, it's neuroscience, but frankly, we should be getting it better sooner than we are. Now, other factors have been flagged up in this report, and my honourable friend for High Peak in particular went into many of these, about the many peer group pressures on our children and young people as a... Well, I have no children anymore. My youngest is now over the age of 18, but we've been through many teenage years, so I have seen it first hand. You can't go out in the morning without the latest iPhone, without checking your Facebook, without tweeting what you're having for breakfast and Instagramming a photograph of what you're having for breakfast, and that's just after you've got up. The stresses to succeed in school and the hothouse of exams and testing are not conducive to the best of mental health unless some support is there to help young people through all sorts of challenges, which we never had in my day, which I guess is even earlier than my own friend, the member for High Peaks. And social media is a huge influence on young people that was just not around in our day or your day, Madam Deputy Speaker, either, I'd hazard to guess too. So, I will, of course, before I say something indiscreet.
I'm sure he'd never say anything indiscreet. I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and he makes, as always, very important observations in these debates. He and I were both at school together, and at that time, when children left the school, they left the problems behind if they had bullying going on or anything like that. But does he agree one of the challenges now is any problems like that go with the child beyond the school gate to the home, and it also through the summer holiday, or holidays if I'm not careful. And does he agree that there are further steps that should be taken by digital service providers to help provide apps and protections that will help those children in those difficult circumstances?
Well, I do agree, and believe it or not, Madam Deputy Speaker, my honourable friend is older than me and was in the year above me at our school, and all his, although he's aged rather better than me, I think, but he hasn't been in this house quite as long as I have. And he is absolutely right that the environment of the dynamics of where the stresses and strains were in those days, and who you communicate with as well. You know, I had an example recently of where one of my daughters, I won't name which one, basically put in her request for supper by text message, and she was in her bedroom, to my wife and I in the kitchen. So it is extraordinary and ironic that in a supper's off, basically, but and the irony is that in a day where communicating has never been easier, by email, by social media, by mobile device, by tablet or whatever, communications between human beings face to face have never been more rare and remote. And therein lies part of the problem. And particularly communications between children and their parents do not come as readily. And the fault is the parents as much as the children. And why we cannot talk frankly, or some people cannot talk frankly, about the very real pressures and strains and stresses on our children. It may be to do with grooming, it may be to do with sex matters, it may be to do with drugs. But in his day and my day, perhaps, we did talk to our parents more about it, or other family members around us. But I just want to pick up a few points, if I may, now in the report, and I know other members want to speak. So we've got to a position where 1 in 10 school-age children will have some form of mental disorder. That is getting younger. 340,000 5 to 10-year-olds have some form of mental disorder. And of course, if it's not detected early and acted on, it just festers and so often gets worse. And too often, the only immediate response, if you do access a clinician, is the chemical cosh of drugs, which in too many cases are not appropriate for younger children, as we're increasingly finding, where talking therapies and others would be more appropriate, certainly at that earlier stage, but when you're having to wait weeks and months for them, then it's a call between whether you wait longer for the more appropriate therapy or whether you give some form of antidepressant drug or whatever it may be in the short term. And there's a big issue which is flagged up in the report about the transition from childhood to adulthood. Nothing changes physically and mentally to you when you receive your 18th birthday card from your Member of Parliament on your 18th birthday, for example. And the last thing you need, if you're going through stresses of mental illness as an 18-year-old child, is to have a completely different process and system that then has to deal with you because you've suddenly become an adult, and yet your condition has not changed. And there is a particular issue around children in care there, where children in care have been in the past too often leaving care at the age of 16. Fortunately now the new scheme brought in, which I was very proud to have piloted at the Department for Education, about staying put, gives a longer lead-in time, because every child is different, and children will be more resilient to go into the big wide world at different ages. And there's some really good examples in the report of best transition practice, and they cite Southampton Hospital in particular, which has a 0 to 25 age range, and a scheme called Ready, Steady, Go, where every person is treated differently, and not everybody's go age will be the same as everybody else. So if I just touch on a couple of the things mentioned in the report, and firstly the recommendations that they made around training for GPs. It is right, certainly for younger children, that GPs will be the first port of call with clinical services. I think the training of GPs dealing with younger people's mental health problems in particular are not good. I think that a young person who needs a lot of confidence to go along to see a GP with a parent or whoever, there needs to be a very clear understanding as how to get the best, how to tease the best out of that child. So I think we need better guidance, and as the Honourable Lady from Dulwich mentioned earlier, young people absolutely should be in on the genesis of that guidance as well. The second recommendation I just want to pick up is, and we've heard a lot about it, is around what happens in schools. And I think the Honourable Lady for Dulwich quoted the National Association of Head Teachers briefing earlier, which said that when children do not meet CAM's thresholds, it's schools who often become responsibility for children's mental health, and in too many cases they are ill-equipped to do that. And when we are dealing with potentially 1 in 10, that's 3 in a class size of 30 who will suffer from some diagnosable mental health disorder, and as the Chief Medical Officer herself says, 3/4 of them will receive no treatment at all. That also has an impact on that child, but it has an impact on the whole class as well, and it's very much in the interest of the school to do something about it. So we need better training of teachers to be able to identify some of those signs pointing to a mental illness, better awareness of where they can then signpost them to go and get the treatment that they require, but also to be able to talk about it generally in class. And we can have an argument about whether PSHE should be a compulsory subject, and I have a great deal of sympathy with that. We can have an argument about whether mental health should be a formal part of PSHE, but I think the important thing, it needs to be done in an environment where young people will feel engaged, and it's not just another lesson, but it's something they will actually feel free to talk about openly and to absorb and learn from. Of course I will.
For giving way. The point about the proposal that mental health education should become compulsory is simply that its presence on the curriculum is too important to be left to chance. And I agree with him entirely that it needs to be undertaken in practice in a way which is engaging and does the job and is therefore effective at educating young people. But would he agree with me that it shouldn't be left to chance as to whether or not it happens at all?
She and I have the same objectives, I'm sure, in what the end result is we want to achieve. I am always sceptical about the solution for something being to make it another compulsory part of the curriculum. And for the reasons I mentioned earlier, where I think sex and relationship education is an interesting case in point, is some of the best SRE I have seen is from outside youth workers and others who can empathise with young people and talk to them into the way that they will appreciate and respect and learn from. Making it another subject taught by Mrs. Miggins, the geography teacher, who happens to have a free period on a Thursday afternoon, therefore we can put her or whoever in charge of it that lesson, that term, I think therein lies some problems. So what we need to have, I will in just a moment, what we need to have is more schools automatically seeking to, wanting to, because it's in their children's best interest, to have well-informed mental health education in whatever form is appropriate to engage that cohort of children they got in that school. So I don't think our objective and ends are different, but we can have a debate about how we most effectively achieve them. I'll give way to Honourable Lane.
Thank you for the Honourable Member for giving way. He makes a very good point about the importance of having appropriate, properly trained, empathetic people, specialists, delivering mental health education to young people. But he suggests, A, that they are specialist people, and B, that these are done by youth services. The problem is, Madam Deputy Speaker, is youth services are being cut as their non-statutory services of local authorities, and many schools who have been providing and bringing in specialist support by experts, being provided by experts, bringing them into the school to support young people and to support teachers in this curriculum area, they are being cut as head teachers are having to pare back services as they deal with the budget cuts they're having to face.
Well, I hear what the Honourable Lady is saying, and that is a subject for another debate, and it's an issue I've campaigned on for many years and chaired a commission looking into the role of youth workers in schools. And there's some really good examples of best practice, actually interestingly often with academies where they have appreciated the value of youth workers because they can empathise with young people perhaps rather better, to bring them into schools, and that's missing so many other places. So I have been advocating for giving other roles to youth workers who sadly are no longer employed, particularly in local authorities, because it's not a statutory requirement and therefore has fallen by the wayside. And I have a deal of sympathy with that, but that is a subject for another debate and another debate. Very quickly, just a couple more points, Madam Deputy Speaker, it also plays into the last point, and also the importance of resilience and character education into the wellbeing agenda in schools, which is something certainly that recent education secretaries have begun to take on board. And I think a lot of this subject lies within that as well. A fourth issue is how this is monitored. And a recommendation, which I think is another good one within the report, is that Ofsted should have a role here. Ofsted now has a role in assessing behaviour within a school. I think that should extend to how they cope with mental health problems amongst pupils as well. That should be on their checklist to look into. And also, we are really bad in this country about disseminating good practice. And so where there are examples, and I've seen many examples, I remember visiting a school in Stafford, in fact, where they had a full-time counsellor, and I sat in on some of her sessions, and the teachers had confidence in her that they would refer children with whom they had some doubts to go and see, and they would speak frankly to those counsellors. And actually they can prevent a lot of problems occurring later on for those schools who have them and not enough do. And again, we have a debate over why they don't. Then there's the issue of cyberbullying and the whole role of social media. And the examples given in the report about the promotion of self-harm websites, which I think are a huge scourge, and I think we need to be much more aggressive in tackling, particularly for things like anorexia and for self-harm, where people, you don't know if you're going there to seek advice as to find a solution because you've got feelings around self-harm, or you've got anorexic problems, or there are these bizarre websites which are actually promoting those things as well. And as they suggest in this report, I think we need some form of verification scheme, and my honourable friend mentioned it earlier, about a much more responsible and bigger role for our social media companies, who are huge companies employing many thousands of people, and yet in their scrutiny departments, enforcement departments, the numbers are woefully low. As members of Parliament with Twitter accounts, we mostly have blue ticks to show we are who we say we are. Can we not have some form of verification scheme? It's described as a kite marking scheme in here, so that young people, particularly vulnerable, impressionable young people, have some confidence that the sites they are accessing are there to give them support, not to encourage them to do harmful things to themselves. And this applies over so many different areas, including radicalisation sites as well. The recent report, somebody's mentioned body image, the recent report from the Girl Guides, who regularly revisit the image of body image and young girls' perceptions, and it is always so alarming and so petrifying, the number of girls as young as 13 whose aspiration is to have plastic surgery, when your body is not even fully formed, let alone you're growing up mentally, and yet they are being conditioned to think that this is the ideal that they must aspire to. And this is wrong. This is at the root of so many of the weaknesses and vulnerabilities leading to mental illness, and in the most tragic cases leading to suicide, these influences on our young people. And in the old days, a note passed across a classroom sealed with a loving kiss at worst might end up on a playground floor. These days, the equivalent, and the worst extremes, if it's a form of sexting, goes viral and ends up on social media in perpetuity, open to millions of people to see it. That's the difference between the note in our playground days and the casual, ill-advised text on social media these days. And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, the recommendations at the end of the report about young people wanted to relate to people their own age rather than old men in suits, which I guess takes in quite a few of the honourable members here today. And they want to involve young people in the campaign to make it easier, I'm speaking for myself and my honourable friend from High Peak, involving young people in the campaign makes it easier for young people to receive the right message. And so they recommended that a consultation group of young people, both with and without a mental health history, be set up to work on and contribute to the anti-stigma campaign, and that someone is identified to ensure this happens. I completely agree. Final point, Madam Deputy Speaker. When I was a Children's Minister, I had 4 reference groups within the Department of Education, each of whom came to me on a 3-monthly basis. One was children who'd been adopted, one was children in foster care, one was children in residential care homes, and one was children who recently left care. They came to me in the department without adults. We sat round the table and they told me exactly what was going on. They challenged some received wisdoms. I got some of the best information of any experts that I went to by speaking to those young people. This report has been produced by young people. It's been produced by reference to many thousands of young people, many of whom have suffered and are suffering the sorts of problems that many other honourable members and I have already mentioned here today. We need to listen to their voice, we need to act on their recommendations, and we need to include and involve them in the solutions. That's why this report is so important to them, but it needs to be as equally as important to us, to this House and to this Government.